Okay, let's get started. We have really good attendance, which I'm excited to see. I'm going to kind of lay the framework of how we're going to proceed with this discussion. I'm really excited about this. I've been wanting to do a discussion like this literally since day one of of learning and development, which has only been 3 years, but still. And I'm especially thrilled to have both of these people join me in this discussion. For the attendance, I want you to sort of understand how we're going to have the discussion and your role in participating. We really want to see activity in the chats. So if you have questions that you want to pose for your peers, or if you want to just sort of comment on our discussion, you can put that in the chat. You're welcome to do so. If you have a question that is specific for the panelists, please do that in the Q&A. So if you have something that you want us to address, put that in the Q&A. But for general sort of discussion amongst yourselves, put that in the chat. I'm probably not going to be as diligent about watching the chat, but I will be diligent about watching the Q&A. So make sure that if you want us to see it, you put it in the Q&A. We have a good amount of time that we're going to have on this subject, which is creating a learning culture within organizations. Specifically, we're talking about higher education, but I suspect that people who are joining us outside of higher ed will have a lot to learn and contribute as well. The reason why I chose these two people in particular is because they're amazing, brilliant people, and they're coming at learning and development from two different areas in higher ed. One from the academic side in one of the largest colleges here at UT, and one on sort of the operational side. And I'm going to let them talk, sort of introduce themselves. But this is something that's really important to higher ed, that we sort of understand how learning and development and creating learning cultures happens in different areas. And so we're really going to have an interesting discussion, and we're going to have questions for each other and just sort of see where the discussion goes. How's it going, you guys? Thanks so much for joining us. It's been a long time coming.
Thanks for having us, Emil.
Yeah, you bet. I think, Jennifer, you might be muted. Yeah, there we go.
There we go.
And I think we already have a Q&A, and there's already a question coming in. Keep them coming, and I'll try and get to the questions after we've sort of done our introductions and gone into the sort of broad strokes of our discussion. But Jennifer, would you like to just start with just sort of telling us a little bit about yourself and what your role is, in particular, how it relates to learning and development?
Sure. Thanks, Emil. My name is Jennifer McLean, and I am with University Housing and Dining. And my team is the Employee Development and Engagement team. We're part of our HR unit, and we do a number of things related to learning and development. We do a lot of the orientation training of new employees. We've got supervisor training that we do periodically. We've got a supervisor orientation. We also do engagement events and community building and recognition and appreciation. And we really want to create that culture of learning and development because we see that investment in our staff, and that we see it pay off as well.
Can you tell people what University Housing and Dining is and what it does?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
So we have the residence halls on campus, as well as our dining in the residence halls, and Longhorn Hospitality, which is a lot of the dining on other parts of the campus, and our catering operation. So we have our own dining team. We have our own facilities maintenance team. We also have a business services team and a residence life team, the student development and support staff for the students living on campus. So we have about 1,400 employees almost at our peak, and we have student residents. We have about 9,500 student residents that live with us during the year as well. About half of our employees are student employees.
That's great. So big operation, a lot of moving parts, and student focused, but there's a lot of staff also use dining services too. So that's an interesting way of looking at learning and development. Looking forward to hearing that approach. Heather, let's hear what do you do? What's your role? How does it incorporate L&D?
Sure. I'm Heather Gatlin. I'm the Chief of Staff at the College of Liberal Arts, which I'm the Chief of Staff in the Dean's office. I've been in our Dean's office for the last 3 years when our new Dean, Ann Stevens, came to UT. I've been with our college for about 11 years and at UT for about 15 years. In this current role, on top of serving as a day-to-day advisor for the dean, my primary role is to really explore our college's organizational culture and ways in which we can work with staff, faculty, and even students to understand their experience in our culture and to build programs and services around those in order to create a learning culture within our college. Different than the day-to-day learning culture of faculty teaching students, or shall we say, enhancing that.
Great, thank you so much. So let's just dive in, just generally speaking, talk about sort of philosophies and see if there's some differences or some alignment in how you approach learning and development. Maybe Heather, we can start with you this time. What's your general philosophy on workplace learning and your approach to making it effective?
I love this question. My philosophy, and I think this is our philosophy at the College of Liberal Arts, and I'm going to start to say COLA because it's a long, we're UT, we're an acronym place, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
At COLA, we've really been focusing on staff these last few years because staff are the ones that tend to get overlooked in higher ed. And the culture that we're trying to build in our philosophy of workplace learning is seeing staff as empowered leaders, seeing staff as an essential aspect of the ecosystem or component of the ecosystem of higher ed. And we feel that learning is essential to grow as full human beings. And so, some of the things that we are really playing with in these shifts in how we approach workplace learning and leadership training in our college is really getting curious that a learning culture is rooted in curiosity. Using the terminology, I wonder all the time, like, I wonder what this could look like. I wonder what this could feel like. What would our college look like if we were able to do this, and letting ourselves brainstorm and dream and head into places collectively that might not have been explored before. The other part of my philosophy that I use a lot is this concept of utilization, which I won't go super deep into that here, but really it's that growth mindset shift in no matter what comes across your plate, and this could be professionally or personally, is approaching challenges, failures, and breakdowns from a perspective of what is this here to teach me? What can I learn from this moment, from this thing happening in my job, in my life, et cetera? And that, of course, is a simplification, and we can give all the reasons why we can challenge that concept too. But really, from a philosophical perspective, trying to challenge ourselves to bring that question into the day-to-day aspect of our college so that we can open up new energetic spaces of innovation and creativity.
So that's really interesting. I also really promote this idea of curiosity and this idea of exploration. And that's, we have LinkedIn Learning, and I really like it when people just go onto LinkedIn Learning just maybe without an intent, or maybe with an intent, and then they discover certain things. I equate it to when we actually used to use encyclopedias, and dating myself, but you go in there to look at one thing and then you get curious and start looking at all other things around it, or you're in the library. So I think that that's really where innovation happens. And it's so important for curiosity to be sort of the foundation of our learning model, because otherwise we don't have those discovery moments. Like, we don't know what we don't know, right? And so that only happens with exploration. I am a little bit more curious about your utilization idea. Can you, and you explained it well, you said you didn't want to dig in too deep, but I do want to hear more about it. It seems sort of fascinating. Can you dive in just a little bit deeper on it?
Yeah, I mean, please do let me know if my mic is muffled. I'm on headphones, but if that doesn't work out, I can certainly shift to just my laptop sound.
Okay.
Just taking this from a workplace perspective, thinking about when we're sitting in a team meeting or a collaborative meeting working on a new initiative, and a challenge or a breakdown or a failure crops up. Instead of reacting to that and being in a place of digging in our heels and being positional, is like taking that deep breath and asking ourselves, what is this here to teach me? So whether it's dealing with a difficult person that you work with, dealing with a failure or a challenge that you hadn't anticipated, when you start to ask that question of yourself and of the situation, what might I learn from this? What is this here to teach me? All of a sudden it de-escalates the situation.
Yeah.
And it gives this energetic shift that opens up a space where you can consider different options.
Yeah, that's great. And so it's not even sort of with failures or mistakes, that's opportunity. Even with that, it's like, okay, well, here's what I can take away from this.
That's right. And it's not, some people would look at that concept as something like toxic positivity or like this idea of terrible gifts. That's not what we're talking about. Like, really difficult things happen in life. We've all lived through a couple of years, these last 2 years, where that's emphasized more than ever. So it's not to minimize the challenge and the struggle that any of us go through. And it's that paradox of when we do have challenges and struggles, once we let the emotion move through, what questions can we ask ourselves to grow and stretch and learn?
That's great. I'd like to hear your philosophy, Jennifer. And while you're doing this, I'm going to launch a little poll that I meant to do at the start. But what is your general philosophy of learning in the workplace? And how are you kind of employing that philosophy in the work that you're doing?
One of the things that I think of when we're thinking about learning in the workplace is all the different places that it can happen, that it's not just formal training, formal classes. It can be working on a project with different people and learning how to navigate that. It can be just doing something different that you haven't done before, so you have to stretch yourself a little bit. When I'm thinking about learning in the workplace, we talk about training a lot, and we also talk about development. And I'm seeing those things as complementary and both very important. And the way I distinguish them is that training is more about what do you need for the job that you're doing? What is the employer providing to you so that you know the policies and procedures, the rules and whatnot, and that you can be successful meeting the expectations. But development is really looking at the whole person and providing opportunities for continuous growth and fulfillment. And sure, it may provide things that help you do your job better, but it also might set you up for the next step in your career. And so thinking about development as well as a partnership between the employee and the organization, whereas training is all about the organization teaching the employee what they need. Development is a two-way street, and it can look like so many different things. We've got a lot of different people who really do well in that formal academic setting, and we've got a lot of different people that's not their jam. They like to have, different experiences. And so we have to find ways to connect learning to everything we do. And that's something that fits really well in with student affairs. University Housing and Dining is part of the Division of Student Affairs. And what we are doing in student affairs is a lot of the out of the classroom learning that students get in college. And so that idea of learning happening everywhere is something that we hold dear in our department.
So for the poll, it looks like information to help my team develop was 58%. And then next in line, my own professional development. And then interested in L&D training professional, and then other, and then I asked people to add information in the comments. And one person wrote, I'm going to be co-lead of a work group on training and development for IT staff. So that's, Great. Yeah. And this is something that can be really challenging, especially in areas where people are not used to development. So kind of going off of what you were talking about a little bit, Jennifer, but that distinction between training and development, one of the things I'm starting to try and frame it around, and it's something that we have to repeat over and over again, especially at UT, because when people think of learning and development, often they're only thinking about it in terms of training. And one of the ways that I like to try and make the distinction is saying that training is about taking care of the job and development is about taking care of the person who takes care of the job. So it's more encompassing for that person, but you have to understand that it's people who do the job. So you need to make sure that you do more than just training. But yes, so that's one thing that can be very useful of people who are trying to bring development into their group. And in some ways, there's a lot of unlearning that needs to be done, or in something that I think you folks have some experience with as well, where we have to teach people how to learn, right? So it's they're so unaccustomed to it, or maybe they've gone into this specific line of work specifically because they don't like being in a classroom. And so how do we still reach them and make that learning accessible to those people as well? Gordon asked a question. He's a good friend of L&D, and he is talking about something we're talking about right now, which is how you make learning accessible to staff, specifically for groups with varying education, language, and cultural backgrounds that may not have access to technology or work at home. So I think that this is like right on topic for what we're talking about. So Jennifer, how do you respond to that? This is something I'm sure that you see pretty consistently.
Absolutely. It's something that you take a multifaceted approach to. We to address some of the language barriers, we do offer a lot of our training and information in Spanish, and that's something that we're always trying to do even more of, because we have a Spanish preferred population that we want to be able to engage with as well. When you think about the different education levels and the different different exposure to learning, it just comes down to knowing your audience and finding the right fit for that audience. It also means that not everything looks like a class. We've gotten feedback sometime in the past that this class was so much like, there was so much homework or there was worksheets. This was like school. I didn't want to go to school again.
Right.
So what do? Then we make it fun. We don't make a worksheet. We make something, we make an activity. We make something hands-on, something creative. That can really help a lot. Gamification of learning is big now, and trying to make it something that is that is fun. We also had feedback at one point that a lot of staff in the service and trades maybe don't identify with the concept of professional development, which is why we talk about employee development. Because to me, we're all professionals regardless of what your title is, your career. But if you don't see yourself that way, then, who am I to say? I think that reaching all the different staff at different levels, we have people who really want to engage in deep learning, deep processing of very, high level ideas. And so, okay, how can we engage them? Which is maybe a little bit different. And so looking at that, I think really just being creative and finding lots of different approaches.
And I think that there's a fine line there too. Learning is challenging and sometimes it's difficult. And I think that that's part of our education as well. Yes, we can make it fun and we can make it accessible, but also letting people know that it's work. Like, it's going to be challenging. It's going to put you outside of your comfort zone by definition. And, you have to be okay with that. And again, it's a matter of getting ahead of it so that when people are feeling that discomfort, they know that, oh, well, this is learning. That's this feeling that I have is part of the learning process. But yes, if they're really uncomfortable in a certain setting, then they're not going to come and they're not going to be able to synthesize the information. And we have to, go to where the learner is. Heather, do you have anything to add to that?
It was really interesting to listen to your response, Jennifer, because it emphasizes the contrast between our units. where as an academic facing unit, we have a different workforce in the College of Liberal Arts. And so I think where we probably do the most work in this area is related to our diversity, equity, and inclusion work. We have a fantastic DEI director and Dr. Monique Pikus, who has she runs a number of programs in our college to focus on inclusivity in particular. She has an inclusivity advocates program that staff can participate to learn more about issues of inclusivity and how to improve that in their teams and their units. She also runs a community conversation series that's open to all folks within the college to talk about various issues of diversity, equity, inclusion. So yeah, this is an interesting. It's very interesting for me to listen to the contrast of because we don't have many, if any, employees within our college that wouldn't have access to technology, and so that's. You have put me on my growth edge to think about how other areas of the university are challenged with trying to face that issue. It's a great question.
Yeah, it's interesting perspectives. So there's another one I'd like to, actually maybe a couple more. One person is asking, do you designate work time for learning opportunities? A lot of staff are overworked and operational duties often take priority for leaders and staff. So I want to start it out from our perspective, from the Office of Learning and Development. That is our recommendation to managers, that learning and development happens during work time. Actually, the recommendation specifically is 1.25% of a full-time staff employees' work time is dedicated to learning and development. So it's not on top of their 40 hours, it has to happen. And understanding that that might happen in the context of, and this is, again, developmental, not training. And it has to happen, in a variety of ways. It could be in a reading group. It could be a workshop where several people are participating. It could be, a couple minutes a week, a few minutes a week, and LinkedIn Learning. So a lot of different ways that this can happen, but it is part of work. It is part of our culture, and it should be incorporated as work time. So that's our general philosophy. I understand that there are different cultures and different obstacles, which we're going to talk about, but I'm interested to hear from our panelists about this as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. We agree with you completely, Emil, at COLA. Every program that we have been building, creating, implementing is done on work time. And we do, for some of our programs, as people apply for them or enroll in them, we actually ask their supervisors to sign off on that so that we can demonstrate that the supervisors are aware of it and engaged and supportive of their staff. There's certainly more work to be done in helping managers of differing styles to understand the benefits of that, but we are firm believers that this should happen on work time.
Jennifer, do you have anything to add to that?
I agree wholeheartedly that this is where we want to be. I think it's very challenging sometimes with operational needs to balance that. And so that's something that I think we probably will dig into a little bit more when we get to the section about challenges, but being able to accomplish both things.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We will talk about that. And they're real issues, and they're issues that we need to be sympathetic to. I'm going to try, and there's some other great questions on here that I can come back to. I do want to get into some of the things that I want to make sure we talk about too, that I think will also wrap into some of the questions that are in our Q&A right now. So why bother with learning and development? In that, having said that, where we have a lot to do already, we are constantly under the gun to either respond to legislative issues or region issues or strategic plan issues or whatever they might be. And there's work that needs to be done. What are the benefits? Why should people really, incorporate learning and development, concentrate on learning and development, learn more about learning and development? What are the benefits of learning and development? Jennifer, why don't we start with you?
I love this question because my answer is so many. There's so many benefits. I think that we have all probably had a little bit of experience with the challenging labor market right now. And one of the biggest benefits to investing in employee development is retention. And we're investing in the staff that we have. We're helping them grow and develop. And I think that shows not only that we as an employer care about the whole person, that it's not just about what do I need you to do for this job? It's about what do you need to do to be fulfilled? So when we can invest in development, we are demonstrating that in a way that I hope really does lead to retention. I think it also shows that we value learning in general as a culture. So it sets up the tone for what our organization is about. And when you talk about retention, when you talk about people leaving their jobs, in 2021, more than 22% of people said that career reasons were why they left their job. And career reasons includes development and opportunities for advancement. It also includes getting a new career. And that's something that the university can often offer. People can change careers and stay with UT. And so those are all really great reasons to invest in development and invest in our employees in that way and create learning opportunities wherever we go.
I just want to respond to one thing in the chat. People have conflicts, and yes, we are recording this. It will be lightly edited and put up on our YouTube channel with captioning, of course. So I just wanted to make sure that if that other person leaves, that they'll be able to access this at some later date. Heather, what do you have to add to that?
I echo everything that Jennifer said. That's all really wise and important advice and perspective. The first thing that came to my mind when you asked this was, it's important because as employees, we don't check our humanity at the door when we come to work. We are full, rich, multifaceted, interesting human beings. And whether we're staff, faculty, student employees, no matter what role we play at the university, we are not just the activities that we do. And the more that we can invest in people's human development on top of the skill development and the training differentiation we've been talking about, the more we build community, the more we show that mutual investment. I feel like the more people can feel seen and heard, the more connection there is to the work that we're doing, the more palatable things like workday and bureaucracy and all the things that we've all signed up for by being employees of a large R1 state university. We're also here because of the community. And so feeling seen and heard and invested in, it acknowledges our humanity and allows us the ability to grow, because this whole concept of staff as empowered leaders, or all of us at UT as empowered leaders, like that happens when we invest in one another, when our university gives back to us as much as, or meets us to what we give to it as well. And so the other thing is, it just opens up space for us to be creative, to be innovative, to consider challenges from new perspectives. Our world is constantly changing. And when we empower people to develop as humans, we wander into new spaces and find new solutions that we might never have considered before. And I've also found that, interestingly enough, like investments in learning can actually open up new space and time. It's almost like you're creating time, and people
creates
feel
capacity.
like that's right. You create capacity, and you feel like you have more time because you're more fully seen and heard and invested in.
Yeah, and this is the question in Q&A. So I'm tying this into about how to sort of measure the value of success of employee development. And yes, so upskilling, reskilling, we have to always be learning. It's just the environment we live in. We have to always be learning and growing, because if we don't, we're sunk. Like we have to be ahead of it. And then there are the other measurable things like retention, recruitment. How well are we recruiting top talent? Those are measurable results we can find. Another way is looking at things like compliance violations. If we have really effective manager training, we'd like to see a decrease in manager compliance violations. So those are all long-term, but they're very real. I was having a discussion with some leaders last week, I think, about all these measurable things. And there was a leader in the room his job is numbers. Let's just put it that way. And we're having this discussion about all these metrics that we can have and measure, productivity as a result of, learning and development, and how we can retain talent and all these things. And he spoke up and he said, out of all this, we also, we need to bring up the fact that this altruistic aspect of learning and development. And I was so glad that he was the one to say it, because it really sort of put an exclamation point on it, that it's the right thing to do. Like both of you are sort of implying and speaking to, it's about humanity. And it's about, wellness and treating people well, because as human beings, we need to learn and grow. So yes, we certainly should measure, and we should find ways to measure our success in those ways. But we also have to keep in mind that it's taking care of people, and it's about humanity. And that's an important thing not to lose sight of. Any other comments about those subjects? I'm going to clear that one. It's an important one. Measuring success is important.
The only thing that I'd add to that, Emil, is there's those qualitative measures too, right? I think in higher ed we can, and I think in our society at large, we can focus very much on the quantitative, and sometimes asking people how their response to challenges has changed, how their perception of their satisfaction at work has changed because of learning and development efforts, et cetera. Like actually going to people and getting that feedback is important too.
Absolutely. Yeah. So now in terms of your efforts, maybe sort of being more specific about what you're doing, what programs and services are you offering in your areas for learning and development? So maybe talk about some of the different events you've developed or some of the programs you're doing. And we can start with Heather. I know a fair amount about your leadership program. I'd like to hear more. So why don't we start with you, talk about some of the things that you're doing over in COLA.
Sure. We started this a few years ago, pre-pandemic, where we started out with workshops focused in our dean's office, and we were looking to go beyond that, and then COVID. But there were workshops to really get a finger on the pulse of people's staff's experience in our college. What is it that they cherished and treasured about working in liberal arts, and what were the pain points that they were experiencing, to get a sense of what we might want to build at our college to help meet the needs and to develop and enhance our organizational culture. So we started out by doing this by scheduling regular meetings with, something as simple as like a monthly meeting with senior staff across the college. We're a ginormous college, and one beautiful surprise of quarantine is that all of a sudden we all had Zoom, and we could convene these giant meetings where more people could participate than if we tried to convene in person on campus. And so we were able to start to build community with regular meetings where we were using those virtual meeting spaces as opportunities for learning and development. So while we might have solely used those things in the past to communicate information or changes in policy and procedure and talk about business operations, we still do some of that, but we started to shift to where we have been using some of that time, whether it's every other month or a portion of each meeting, to talk about how we can develop as a college, as an organizational culture, how we can cultivate learning and development in our college. We also started a professional development fund. As a huge college, we recognize that different units in our college have different resources. And so we had some units that had, $1,200 available to every staff member every year to attend a conference. And we had other units that had nothing. And so we felt it was important at the dean's office level to build a professional development fund where any staff member in the college can apply for funds to attend conferences, learning and development opportunities. So that's been a great thing that we've launched. I mentioned our DEI programs that Dr. Pikus runs for us with our inclusivity advocates and community conversations, which are crucial in building a learning environment from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective. And then last but certainly not least, as you mentioned, Emil, this last academic year, we launched our inaugural Staff Leadership Academy for the College of Liberal Arts. And we describe this as a transformative leadership academy where we are working in community to develop human relational skills that transform the way that we move in the world and the way that we move in the workplace. So we focus on communication and not just like how to listen or how to write things. We actually skip over that and we go straight for the deeper skill work that needs to happen in our workplace, which is how do we deeply listen? How do we listen to hear and understand as opposed to listen to respond? How do we mirror what someone is sharing with us? How do we reflect back to them their own brilliance and genius? So we're teaching skills that are building relationship, they're building community. We explore how to enter into collaboration and work in a collaborative environment. Because in our college, things don't get done without collaboration in this day and age. We talk about wellness for employees and leaders and what it means to care for yourself while caring for an organization, whether you're a manager or a frontline staff member. And we explore what it means to deal with challenges, breakdowns, failures. And through all of that, our staff that join that Leadership Academy, they explore their own leadership genius. We walk them through different activities throughout the year that help them really identify what calls them to their work, what are they uniquely here to do and to serve and to create in the world, and how can we build their skills and their understanding of interpersonal relationships and their own impact to really launch their work into the world in new and exciting ways. So we've done it it's a 9-month program that we do at our college. We just finished our first year in May, and we are about to admit our second cohort to start next September.
Well, congratulations. I know how much work it is. I also know how incredibly rewarding it is to those programs. You mentioned your own COLA's Professional Development Fund. I just dropped in the chat UT Staff Council's Professional Development Fund, and something if people don't know about, they should know about. It's there's always a couple, we're going to talk about challenges next, but time and resources are sort of the common themes for obstacles on learning and development. And UT Staff Council has been great about pushing professional development, what we call learning development now. So that's another resource. Something else that comes to mind, Heather, about your sort of designing the curriculum for that cohort, that group of people, on where they are in their careers. And that's something else that we need to be aware of too, is that, when you're talking about listening in an active way and listening to have meaningful responses and those sorts of things. But we also need to think about people who aren't there yet, right? And that's something that I'm looking at right now as well. We have the Leadership Growth Program and an FAS portfolio, Financial Administrative Services. And it's a great program, but number one, it's small, but we don't want to be elitist about it. But it's just the nature of leadership programs. You need to have an intimate setting, but also it's designed for a group of people that are in a particular evolution in their leadership development. But we have people who are not quite there yet, and we need to address them as well. And then we have other people who are already in executive leadership, but we need to think about their leadership and development needs as well. And then we have the whole problem of just using the word leadership in development and how that tends to be exclusionary, as in not being inclusive for other people, because they think, well, I'm not a leader because I'm not in a leadership role. And so right away, by just calling it leadership, that has a tendency to put up walls to people as if to say, this isn't an opportunity for you. And so those are all things that as learning development professionals, we sort of need to be aware of. And there's some questions about inclusivity that we need to create space of belonging all the time and be, cognizant of that. And it's an ongoing challenge, but it's part of, again, what can be so rewarding is breaking through to help those people develop as professionals, but also in their personal lives as well.
Yeah, I take all those points, and they're absolutely true and valid. And that's one thing. And we're still pretty early on in our creation of our leadership academy, but from the very beginning, we've been really mindful to be careful, or just mindful of the language that we put out about what we're trying to create, and that this isn't something for the elite only in the college. This is something as I said from the beginning, we consider every staff member as an empowered leader, whether you're in a managerial or a director position, or whether you're 6 months out of your undergraduate degree and you're a brand new advisor or administrative assistant. We want to cultivate your capacity as a leader and as a human being in our college. And we have built a program that helps people learn in this safe learning container that is extremely diverse. And that's diversity in all the ways. And this first cohort we had everyone from people that had just graduated from undergrad to people that were mid to late career with PhDs and everything in between. And we mix them all up, and they learn to do this work together. And I think what we find is that when we're talking about developing those human skills and how we relate to one another and how we move through the world, many of us are on a pretty level playing field, no matter where we're at in our lives. And but we look forward to continuing to grow and be challenged and be in our own growth edge as we continue to develop this.
Yeah, and that's why diversity, again, broad, using that word as broad a sense, is so important in these programs, because of that peer learning and learning from different perspectives. It is invaluable. Jennifer, tell us about some of the programs. What are you doing over in housing and dining in the way of learning development?
First off, I'm going to go research your learning academy. Or your leadership academy. That sounds fantastic, and I'm very interested in learning more about that. We have, we do a number of different things to reach different audiences with different purposes. So one of the things that we've done a lot in the past year is wellness classes. We've partnered with Campus Partners, Health Point, EAP, bringing lots of different topics for our staff relating to wellness. And that's something that we have a lot of different ways that we can approach wellness. We may have focused a little bit on emotional wellness and physical wellness. We also want to improve occupational wellness, thinking about our satisfaction in our career, which really ties along with that learning and development. So that's one type of training. We also do, with supervisor training, one of my favorite things to do is use LinkedIn Learning. We've got these great resources. Let's take them and then let's use them in a way that helps us deepen the conversation. So we've done some either lunch and learn or like a supervisor roundtable where I've assigned pre-work, watch this course or watch these videos, and then let's come together and let's talk about them. Let's apply them. Let's, consider how this impacts our specific job, because we have people in those groups then that are from all of our different areas and have entirely different jobs. So how can they apply these concepts to what they do? You also mentioned, Emil, when you talked about your leadership, the FAS leadership and development program, how it's small. And I think it can be very, very impactful, those small, intimate settings. One of our most impactful programs is our adult education. We do ESL, English as a Second Language, and conversational Spanish classes. And those are something that it really makes a difference in people's ability to connect with each other, and confidence and leadership skills, and just really having that opportunity to learn a new language and communicate with coworkers you might not have been able to communicate before is very powerful, very impactful.
Yeah, and it is kind of we do want to be inclusive, but there is something that is really meaningful when you are able to learn from peer group. And when it gets too big, one, administratively, it's much more difficult, but also it's easier for people to hide. And it can be more intimidating when you have a large group of people, if you're not comfortable speaking in front of them. And it's such a better, in terms of leadership growth in particular, it can also be a problem. And you both have maybe heard me talk about this, because if you have a huge amount of people going through leadership and then there's nowhere for them to grow, then you have a leadership bottleneck. And that can be very frustrating. Well, wait a second, I just spent 9 months, 6 months going through this program, and yet I can't grow because of the limitations of career paths or whatever it might be. That might be frustrating, but our philosophy is we're training and helping you become a leader no matter where you go. Yeah, we want you to stay because we think you're great. But if it enables you to go to a place where you're really making a positive impact and doing ethical and effective and wonderful things, that's great, and that's okay with us. And I suspect that's maybe the same with how you approach your learning as well.
Definitely. That's something that our leadership supports is, of course, we'd love for you to stay here, but investing in you is important, even if it means you're going someplace else to be more fulfilled.
Yeah. There was a question reminded me when you were talking about your adult learning. Somebody was asking if we something that has to do with pedagogy. We are very adamant about our approach is not pedagogy. It's andragogy. It's adult learning theory. It's the worst word I can never pronounce it, but it is adult learning that we're looking at, and we make a distinction. And we really have to, when we work with people who are not in that space, whether it's faculty or visiting vendors, we have to really make that point that this is a different kind of instruction. I think we're starting to see a little bit of a blending of these two things, because people are realizing that what is really effective as adult learners is actually really good for students, as well, like blended learning, for example, which you were talking about with LinkedIn Learning. We're all about it and how it really is effective to say, watch this 5-minute video. And then when you come into an instructor-led training, you can hit the ground running and you can participate and add your own comments in a really meaningful way. Or if it's just an article, something that gives them some context so that when they're in the instructor-led training or a workshop, they feel like, oh, I can contribute because at least I have some foundational understanding of what you're talking about. And so I think that, that at the time it was called the reverse classroom. We're seeing that a little bit with pedagogy as well. Any other comments or thoughts about that before we hit the big question we've all been waiting for? So the next one has to do with challenges. What are some of the challenges you face implementing learning and development in your areas? And I'm going to launch another poll so that we can hear from the attendees as well, which it's the same question. What is your greatest challenge when it comes to learning and development, L&D? So we'll hear back from our attendees. You should see the poll, we have them running in, but while that's coming in, why don't we start with you, Jennifer? What are the challenges that you specifically sort of face in housing and dining or higher ed, or in general, what are the challenges that you hear about or you face with learning and development?
Well, I'm really excited to see this poll because some of those are a lot of the things that we hear. One of the biggest challenges is that making time for learning and development, because we're a busy department. We've got a lot going on and we always have a lot going on. There's not a downtime. It's not like the summer is slow for us. We're, as busy or more busy in some areas. And so we have those peak periods throughout the year. So finding time when staff have the bandwidth to engage with the learning and to, there's the brain space available. And additionally, if the only downtime we have is the time that you can take off work, well, I want you to do that for your well-being, take your vacation. So when do we fit in learning and development? And it's something that I don't have the answer to yet. It's a moving target, and it's something that we have some success at, and sometimes it doesn't work as well as I'd like. We also we've talked a little bit about the different education levels and different experiences with learning and different needs in that regard, which is less of a challenge and more of just an opportunity. I think more of a way to, it challenges me to be creative and to think of different things. But it also means that not everything is for everyone, and that's okay. In a department our size, we don't want to, it's okay if we haven't created something that everyone engages with. We want to create enough things that connect to enough people. And I think we talked a little bit also about, like you mentioned, with the bandwidth and the administrative process behind creating some of these programs.
Yeah.
And just how much our staff really appreciate a very high touch style. And that takes so much effort and time. And it is wonderful. It's meaningful. It's worth it. But there's only so many of us that can be, doing that. So those are some of the things that we see as challenges.
So I want to get to this question too. The question had to do with the adult learning theory stuff, but the second part was had to do with accessibility and sort of making sure that you are inclusive, because that's another challenge that we see, and everywhere on the academic side, on the operational side. But as long as we sort of have you here and you're talking about that, how can you help ensure that when you create learning, that it's creating space that promotes belonging and inclusiveness, and you're not as we talked about already, putting up a wall to some people, not intentionally, but really you have to be proactive about creating that inclusionary space. What are your thoughts about that, Heather?
It's very important. And I'm very much always learning. I'm always trying to listen and hear and reflect on where we have done well or where we haven't done well. One thing is asking people, getting feedback and learning from that. Another piece is setting the expectations ahead of time. I think you alluded to this with the idea of leadership. That term, is that a term that people will resonate with? Can we redefine that term? Can we make sure that people know that this is for them? That this is something that everyone is welcome to. And I also think that personal touch of reaching out to people and saying, yes, we want you. We think you would be great in this. We would love to see you here. We'd love to have this conversation with you. And that's part of that high touch.
Yeah,
so
that's great. Yeah, thank you for saying that. And that's something that I think when you're part of a huge institution like UT, there's this tendency to sort of cast a broad net and maybe sort of be intentional about where you cast that net. But sometimes it is high touch like that, and going to a specific person and say, I see you. And I think that we'd like to, share your voice and have you be part of this. And that's what it takes. And sometimes you have to be that intentional about it. Heather, what are your challenges?
Many of them are similar to what Jennifer shared. The scale of our college is certainly a challenge. That we can design learning opportunities and leadership programs, and I don't want to say it's impossible to get to everybody, but we acknowledge that we're only at the beginning still. And so trying to figure out how to break through the hierarchy to ensure that people are getting that high touch, that they are hearing directly from the dean's office and not necessarily filtered through multiple layers of leadership to understand what opportunity is there for them. And figuring out ways to get to staff at all varying levels of our organization is really key. The workload and burnout thing, I saw that someone wrote in the chat that staff burnout is a big challenge. That's real. I mean, that is the lived experience of staff on this campus, and it's never been anything different than that since I've been at UT, and I don't expect it will change anytime soon. And so, really designing things that have meaning to people, where they feel like they're going to enhance their lives, and that it's not just focused on their tasks, I think is really key. But it presents a lot of challenges, especially when you do have a diverse workplace and people are in quite a variety of roles and jobs and levels of their careers. So that's definitely a challenge. to be brutally honest, I think one of our big challenges, and someone alluded to this in either the chat or in the questions, is we've got a hierarchy problem in higher education. And, your degree and your status as, a scholar is currency in higher ed. And how do we, particularly in a large CSU like ours on the academic side of the university, how do we help those faculty that are in leadership positions and chair and director positions understand the value of this type of learning for their staff in particular? And we, I have said this many times before, and I'll say it in any venue. Just because any of us earn a higher degree does not mean we have been taught how to interact and be collaborative and diplomatic and manage other human beings. And so,
or even how to apply that knowledge.
That's right. And so I think that's a big gaping hole in higher ed that where there's a lot of opportunity, right? There's that shift, right, of utilization. Like the hierarchy is a huge challenge. Yeah. And what would it look like if we started to approach faculty leadership and staff leadership that may not have had managerial training as they ascend into those levels of leadership in the university? How do we ensure that they go through a process where they understand how to exist in that space where people will feel fully seen, fully heard, appreciated, to where they're going to end up being the most engaged, committed, effective, efficient employees that want to stay, that want to grow, and that want to continue and to contribute to the mission of the university.
Yeah. So I released the results of the polls here, and you can see lack of resources, for example, time and money is top of the list, and then followed by lack of training and guidance on how to implement and sustain learning development. And then we see cultural resistance to learning in the workplace. And I was pleased to see low on the list, lack of leadership support, although as is indicated in the comments, all of the above is part of it. And so much of that is intertwined, right? They overlap in a lot of ways. So I do want to talk a little bit about the lack of time and resources, time and money thing. This came up today in another meeting I was in this morning. It's real. I'm not, diminishing that, but it's important to look at learning development as investment, right? Or strategic work. And if you don't dedicate effort to that, strategic work, it never happens. Like you're always going to be putting out the same fires, making the same mistakes, unless you get ahead of it and figure out how do we solve the problem. So I've used this analogy a lot over the years, but the leaky boat where we're constantly bailing water. And it's my job to bail the water. I can't stop bailing water because that's what we do. All we do is bail water over this leaky boat. And learning development is about how do you fix the leak once and for all so you don't have a leaky boat. And that's getting ahead of it. And yes, there's this fear that you're going to be taking on water during that time. And we have to help provide capacity so that the boat doesn't sink in the meantime. But we cannot be in a situation where all we're doing is bailing water and not fixing the problem, getting ahead of it. And that also has to do with innovation. We hear a lot about continuous improvement, what starts here changes the world, but you can't have continuous improvement if you're not continuously learning. That's not a possibility. So you always have to be learning. And that's why it's so important to say, well, I don't have enough time. We need to work as leadership needs to work with you. We need to find the capacities that we can learn. Otherwise, we're never going to be able to move forward. So the next thing you feel free to comment on that, but the other thing I want to talk about is the leadership aspect, because it also aligns, with what you were talking about, Heather, with this hierarchy issue that is just inherent in higher ed, for good or bad. And there was a comment in the questions too, as the first question actually came in right away before we even started asking questions. How do you help resistant leaders see the benefit of a learning culture when they are adamant that it is a waste of time? And this is a real thing there are plenty of leaders and managers out there who their philosophy is butts in seats, and we don't have time for this development nonsense. How do we address it? How do we deal with this issue? Because it is a real challenge that a lot of people are facing. And I'm going to make you give us the answer first, Heather. What's the solution? How do we deal with this?
$1 million solution, right? I don't pretend to know all the answers to this. I think as I struggle with thinking through this at our own college, I think about how we have to change the expectations for those leaders. We need a culture shift in higher ed and at our university where we hold our leaders accountable, our managers, our supervisors accountable for how they manage the people that work for them. We don't currently, other than units that choose to do 360 evaluations, our managers evaluate us. We don't evaluate our managers. And if their primary role is to manage, we need to be looking at new and innovative ways that employees can give feedback about their experience as an employee and what they need in managers and the kind of support that they need. So I think there's a lot of room for us to explore in these areas and reach out to people working at all different areas at levels of this university to better understand what it is that we need. And I think that, the history has just been, well, I work for a difficult person and I can't do that in my role. And so I'll hang out here for as long as I can tolerate it, and then I'll move on to the next thing. And I think we're better than that. I think that we're at a time in our university and with the last couple of years that we've gone through where we understand our interdependence, our interbeing, our reliance on one another. It's time for us to raise the expectations there. And that's something I really look forward to exploring in our college. And I look forward to exploring across the university is how we can raise the bar of the expectations of managers to move into a different space.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I want to hear your take on it too, Jennifer. I think the irony in higher ed is that the often leaders on the academic side, at least, are faculty members, and their perception about what learning is very different, right, than what happens in the workplace. And so that's sometimes an education that has to happen. We're explaining this isn't nonsense. It's something that's essential in the workplace, and it doesn't always look like the way it looks in higher education. And we have this model and this tendency to think of education as taking place, between the ages of, 6 and 25, and then it stops and you go start producing and delivering for whatever. And it needs to be a lifelong endeavor. And that, again, in terms of leaders, you have to educate them and say, it's not what you think it is in the workplace. And there's a lot of education that has to happen just to get the ball rolling with leaders.
Well said.
Jennifer, what are your thoughts on this?
I think it's a fascinating question. And I want to tie it back a little bit to one of the things in your challenges list, which was the leadership support. And I see a lot of times the highest level of leadership very much supporting learning and development. And then you've got the folks in the middle who are managing the people bailing out that boat, and they're stuck because whether they think it's important or not, they still have to get that boat bailed out. And so I think part of the challenge is making sure that message, that culture of learning is important, comes from the top, comes from all angles, comes from all directions. So setting that as the expectation that the culture of your organization involves learning as well as producing. And then I think when it comes down to individual people and you're trying to change hearts and minds, different people are going to need different things. Some people come with the numbers, show me the statistics, show me the value, give me the return on investment. And other people, the human side is going to sell it more. We had some really great coverage of our ESL program in the Daily Texan the other day. And one of the things that I loved about that is it was a story about one of our students who has just recently been able to move up in her career and take on a position of leadership in her organization. And part of that was because she was involved in this ESL program. And so those stories, so telling those stories, and that kind of goes back to that quantitative versus qualitative reasoning. So really trying to convince people with lots of different directions as well.
I love that. I'm making a note to myself. Tell the stories. Like, again, yes, we can do certain things with numbers, but those anecdotes, those real life anecdotes of how learning development helps people and helps organizations. I mean, it's so essential. There's a couple more, maybe one more that I want to tie into the challenges thing. This question: what tips do you have to re-engage employees with learning when they are content or they are content in their jobs and subject matter experts in their area, but not interested in learning more or cross-training? So this is something that I think we see with learning or with leadership development, right? So they've reached this high office, and maybe their culture is that learning happens in conferences, very expensive conferences where they have to travel. And that's not necessarily true. But how do we do that where these people, they're great at what they do? And so how do we re-engage them and say, we really value what you do, but we still always have to keep learning? How do you reach those folks? Let's start with you, Jennifer.
That's a great question too. One thing that comes to mind is just thinking about what even is growth. You know, the analogy of a plant, some plants grow straight up, some plants grow far out, some grow very deep. Which kind of growth is this person going to really benefit from or connect with? What are they looking for personally? Yeah. Another thing to think about is you've got someone who's a subject matter expert who's really great at what they're doing and you want to engage them in learning. Can we engage them in teaching others? Can we engage them as a mentor? Because that's a way that you can really both help someone else learn, but also learn yourself. You know, what does that learning look like? It doesn't have to look like someone with more knowledge giving you, the person with less knowledge, their knowledge. You know, that can be just something that it goes many different directions. It involves lots of different opportunities. And so thinking about how this person wants to grow and what's going to help them grow. And that takes a lot of work. You know, like our second biggest challenge was knowing how to even do this.
Mm-hmm. Right. Teach people how to be, and it's not necessarily their job to be L&D professionals, but we should give them some guidance and we should give them some resources, which is another thing we can talk about. This also came up in the previous meeting this morning, where it might not be career development that they're interested in, but they just want to keep getting better and better at what they do. And I think reaching those people to say, yeah, you're good at what you do, but there are things happening in your industry, and that's professional development. And sometimes there's some blending of career development, professional development, but we can always grow. We should always be able to think we can do better. And so how do you stay ahead of the curve and how can you do that? The other thing I'm going to give a plug to this book I'm reading. It's backwards, but it's called From Strengths to Strengths by Arthur Brooks. And it's about this idea that at a certain point in your life, this book is not for everybody, but it's good for me because I'm getting old. Actually, I am old. But anyways, so the idea is that at a certain point in your life, you know, maybe it's not about just constantly consuming, although we always have to be learning, but you should also be thinking about, what can you share? And, and so I think that that's going to be true for a lot of people to say, okay, if you're an expert in this area, why don't you share? Why don't you do some succession planning? Why don't you help people get, some of the experiences that you've gone through so that they can benefit from all this experience you have? So I think that that's a really sound advice that you have too, Jennifer. Heather, what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I love what you both just shared. I think as I think about this, what comes to mind is it's a conversation. It's never going to be successful if it's just a dry requirement that's on someone's performance evaluation. Like, you will start doing this. That's not how people respond in a way that's really going to develop them as humans. And so wandering into a place as a colleague if you're a manager, with those that you supervise, and opening up a dialogue and a conversation exactly about what you were just saying, Emil, and Jennifer, like talking with that person about what is it that they want to create, how do they want to grow? Again, getting back to this like curiosity concept of, what would it look like? What would it feel like to go in this direction or go in that direction? And really opening and holding space for people to share with you what they want to do. One thing that I've realized throughout my career and even my personal life is people don't get asked those questions very often. And so when those of us that are in leadership positions start to ask the questions and show up consistently to where people understand that they can trust us and they can invest in the conversation and in the dialogue, again, a new space opens up where innovation and new ideas can be put onto the table. And I think people even surprise themselves. Those employees that we all know that know the thing and want to do the thing and don't want to be challenged about the thing, I think will even surprise themselves when they start to have that deeper conversation. I think it's a process.
I have to apologize because I have a leaf blower going in the background, so I'm going to try and get closer to my mic and not have you hear the leaf blower. But I do want to. I see these other questions. I want to tackle this question about what tips do you have for tying learning back to the actual work done in each unit, both on a positional level and across organizations. I want to start it out, and then I want to hear from each of you briefly. I am not surprised we're actually running out of time, and we could talk about this, I'm sure, for hours more. But from my perspective, yes, sometimes it's helpful to tie your learning to the work that gets done. I will say, however, I do not believe that should be mandatory when requesting learning and development opportunities. I don't think managers and leaders should say, how does this tie into have a direct effect on the work that you're doing? Because often we don't know. We need to sort of go through that experience, that exploratory or curiosity of learning. We don't really know yet. And the example I give is if you're in custodial services and you want to learn Italian and you don't work in the Italian department, but there are benefits to learning that language, not necessarily because you're going to apply it directly to your work, because it opens your mind, it makes you think differently, it really improves learning new language, improves critical thinking. So all these things have an effect on you as a professional, but again, it's good for the person. So yeah, sometimes you might have a conversation, and it should be part of your performance discussions where you say, okay, you want to do this, is there an effect? But it should not be the end all and be all, because we don't know. You're gonna have to explore and do something. Now, certainly there's a limit to that, where somebody says, I'm going to go take golf lessons. Like you have to have some curb on it a little bit, but you should have a lot of leeway as a manager and leader to just sort of let your direct reports just learn for learning's sake. That's a good thing. Jennifer, what are your thoughts about it?
I like asking the question beyond everything that you just said, that that learning for the sake of learning is a value. And instead of asking the question, how do you apply this directly to your job, which is a good question to ask. Other questions I like are, how does this make you see things differently than you did before you learned about this? Or how did learning this benefit your emotional well-being? Or how did this experience open your eyes? Or questions about that kind of, it takes it a little bit farther away from I have to apply this exactly to here.
To my current duties.
My current duties, what did this give you new ideas about? Where did you come up with any creative things that you might not have thought of before? So questions that are helping you tie it into the value to you as a human, not just the value to you as an employee.
I love that. That's great. Anything to add, Heather?
I mean, you both hit it out of the park on that one. So I really don't have anything to add. I think, Jennifer, those questions are brilliant. And Emil, I think that concept of learning for learning's sake is absolutely what we're all talking about and striving for. And ultimately, when you allow those two things, or you cultivate those two things, the learning for learning's sake and then the engagement with people, you're not just developing them. Now my phone's going to ring while I'm in my office here. So who answers phones anymore, right? We'll just ignore that. Hopefully it wasn't the president's office. And asking those questions, it comes back around to making people feel seen and feel heard and part of a community. And ultimately, that's part of what we're looking for as human beings. We are creatures that crave to be in relationship with one another in all different ways, unique to each of us. But those questions and that concept, I think, again, hit it out of the park of what we'd love to cultivate.
Thanks. That's great. I'm going to skip one of them. I think we covered a lot of sort of the difference in higher ed. Feel free to comment on it. But in this next question, we might be able to incorporate part of that. In terms of UT's status with learning and development, how would you describe the University of Texas at Austin specifically in terms of a learning culture? Where are we? Where are we going? What are we doing? Heather, give us all the answers.
Oh, again, another $1 million question. I think we're shifting. I think we're at the beginning of this shift from understanding this pedagogical approach, the historical kind of hierarchical approach to learning in higher ed, to this new adult learning focus, particularly when it comes to staff. But I would also argue for faculty, which maybe is still even a little more untapped. Moving from just seeking degrees and certification, and not that those things aren't important, particularly in our sector, but to that development of the deeper human development. So I do see that shift taking place. With the creation of your role in your office, Emil, I think that was a huge signal to the university that we're starting to turn this ship in a different direction. And I think it's opened up for those of us starting to do this work across the university in collaboration with you to step into different places. I think our current leaders across the university are listening in a different way and are open to new solutions and new exploration of how to learn and develop folks. I think we have a greatly untapped brilliance and genius of our staff. And I think the more that we can bring staff to the table in helping to identify solutions and ways in which we can create and build things around their needs and around the ways in which they want to see themselves grow personally and professionally, we've got a lot of opportunity there. I think we're really under-resourced. Your office in particular, Emil, should probably be an office of 50 people for a university this size. And I don't know, I think you're 3 people maybe. So you can comment on that. But, I think we're in this stage of forming collaborations and community across the university. This dialogue today is a perfect example of that, where we've all been very siloed and we're recognizing the brilliance that exists in each of us across the campus, and how can we learn from one another, and how can we create with one another, and what would it look like for this campus to see this burgeoning learning culture in ways that we haven't tapped into before. So I think we're shifting. We've got a lot of room for growth, and it's a really exciting time to be working in this area.
Agreed. Yeah. Jennifer, what do you think? Where is UT in all of this?
Well, everything Heather just said. And I've worked on this campus for about 25 years now, more than that, really, even as a student employee. And I definitely see that shift. I see that there's more energy toward learning and development. There's more support for including staff and developing staff in ways that I haven't seen as much in the past. And I think it's an exciting time to be in these types of roles and to be thinking about the ways that how can we tap into this? There's a desire for more learning. There's a desire for more development. And there's a desire to find ways to really emphasize what a great place to work UT is. I mean, we always think so, but I think it's one of those things that this is an extra added bonus if we can really invest in learning and invest in our talent and that untapped brilliance, that genius. I love that. There's so much on this campus, and it's not just in the people with PhDs. It's everywhere. And so I'm very optimistic about that and about the future of learning and development here.
Yeah, I mean, you can see it. We're undergoing, have been undergoing strategic planning efforts, and in President Hartzell's language, he talks about talent development quite a bit and how essential it is for attracting, recruiting, and retaining top talent. It is, as we've mentioned already, such an important factor in getting people who really are high potential and high achievers into an organization. And yeah, I think that they're just from that language and that recognition of how important development is in the president's office and elsewhere, we can see that there's some movement there, and it's encouraging. On that note, where are we going? Like, what is the future of learning and development? And what are some of the sort of cutting edge things? And in particular, maybe we can start with your area, but feel free to expand on that if you are excited about some things. And what are you doing? What are you envisioning to really do innovative things with learning and development? Jennifer, let's start with you.
Yeah, I'm cracking up at Gordon's comment. Give Emil 48.5 more people.
Yeah, I'll take it. You can write to the president.
I support that. I think we're at a moment where we're coming out of some very weird years, and I think we've got this time to have a reset, time to have a new way of looking at these things. So I'm very, like I said, I'm very optimistic about this. One of the things that I know we have a big desire for is also engaging with our student employees and student employee development, in addition to staff development. I also, our department makes use of the Clifton Strengths as a developmental tool. And so I'm really looking forward to using more of that and having that influence our opportunities for development. I think it's a great way for people to learn about themselves and grow. And then, whether we are looking at ways to do career advancement, career path training, or just ways to do, to support the growth and that whole human development, I'll be looking for things that we can do in that realm as well. I'm really excited to see the culture of this poll, or the results of this poll.
Sorry, I'm sure it's super distracting, but I wanted to make sure that we got this one done before we signed off. So there's a poll up about how we can make help you make a positive impact. So we'll let that run for a while. Yeah. Any other last comments about the
last thing that I'm going to take away from this is something I hadn't has as much thought on before, but that comment that leaders want to develop their team, but don't maybe have the tools and resources and don't know how. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that I want to take back to my team, and let's think about how we can support that.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. Heather, what's the future of L&D? What are you doing?
I love these comments in the chat, and I might use the poll as a little bit of a cheat sheet here. I think we're just at the beginning, like I was saying before. I really think there's so much opportunity in this area. I would love to see a campus-wide movement of seeing staff as empowered leaders and really elevating beyond staff council, elevating the voice and the engagement of staff, and the investment in staff across the campus, and meeting them where they are and developing them from that place. So lots of space to explore there. I really want to see leadership training for staff and faculty that ascend into managerial roles. No matter what we're doing in our college, that's the feedback that we keep getting from staff, is that they can only take their learning and their concepts so far if they don't have the support, or if they're not working in an organizational culture with their own leader in their unit who's invested in a healthy organizational culture where people feel valued, seen, and heard. And so I think that's crucial to the future of our university, certainly to our college. And so that fits that developing effective and ethical managers and leaders. but it's, I think it goes deeper than that. It's developing people that understand how to meet the human beings that they work with, and develop and cultivate their talents. And ooh, look, there's the poll results. And yeah, I like these comments in the chat where it's all of the above. So yeah, I don't know if I have a crystal ball to predict where we go. I certainly would love 10 years down the road to see learning and development as a robust program across this university. I would love to see cross college, cross university collaboration,
cross hierarchy.
That's right, cross hierarchy. And again, there's so much unexplored territory to move into. So yeah, looking 10, 15, 20 years down the road, I think we have limitless potential to create a culture of empowered leaders, no matter who they are, faculty, staff, students, and beyond.
That's great, thank you. We are at time. There are a couple of questions left about where you bring in outside vendors. I can just address it. It depends on the size. Generally at L&D right now, all we can do is offer enterprise-wide. So we look for those really big themes and try and address those with enterprise-wide events. And then we have community learning team will bring in vendors if we want a customized event for a particular unit. The unfortunate thing about that is that there is a cost that we have to start to be transactional. And then leveraging resources from Gordon, that's one of the main functions of L&D, is we hope to provide those resources for people who don't have them internally. That's why we have things like, the LinkedIn Learning and all of our resource pages, so that you in units don't have to do a lot of heavy lifting, but at least to some extent, you can point them to the direction of where some resources are available. We have, incredible library system that we have at our disposal. We have LinkedIn Learning, which I need to make sure everybody knows, at no cost is available to all, staff, students, and faculty with something that L&D manages. So again, is there an L&D meeting group? No, but what a great idea. That's another thing. I'll add it to my list. But thank you all for joining us. I don't want to keep you all too late, but this will be recorded. We're recording it right now. We'll put it up on our YouTube channel. And thank you for all of your engagement and questions, everybody. Heather, thank you so much. Jennifer, amazing as usual. And it looks like we might have to do something like this again and maybe invite a couple more of our friends.